The world of Varela was not a peaceful place. Its skies were often filled with the flashes of distant battles, and its cities bore the marks of years of war. Once, the planet had been beautiful. Oceans of silver blue water, forests of tall crystal trees, and cities that shimmered like jewels. But now, the land was scarred, and the air carried the smell of smoke and metal. High above the planet, in the heart of the Xyrexian royal palace, the most feared ruler in this part of the galaxy sat on her throne, the Xyrexian queen, sovereign, of a race known for their sharp minds and sharper claws. Her people believed in strength above all things. They did not cry, they did not beg, and they did not trust outsiders, especially not humans. The queen had one daughter, Princess Athelia, the only light in her otherwise cold life. The princess was young, but already graceful and strong. In the Xyrexian way, she was the future of the throne, and the queen guarded her more closely than she guarded her crown. But fate had struck in the most unexpected way. It began during the latest battle between the Xyrexian forces and the Scattered. Human resistance on Varela. A forbidden weapon had been used, no one knew by whom. It was a cruel toxin, designed to attack the body at a level so deep that ordinary medicine could not reach it. Princess Athelia had been caught in its path while visiting a frontline outpost. She was brought back to the palace immediately, but by then, the strange poison had already begun to spread through her veins. Her breathing grew shallow. Her once bright eyes dulled. Even the proud Xyrexian physicians, with all their advanced tools, could only slow the spread. They could not stop it. The queen stood by her daughter's bedside, her tall frame tense, her black-hand silver armor gleaming under the pale light. Her voice, normally cold and commanding, was low and sharp as she spoke to her healers. Find a cure. I don't care what it costs. But no human is to come near her. Do you hear me? No human. The order was absolute. In Xyrexian culture, humans were considered fragile, weak, and unworthy of touching royal blood. Some even believed human contact could bring misfortune. Days passed, and the princess grew weaker. The healers worked day and night, but the toxin did not respond to their methods. The queen's anger began to burn like fire under ice. Whispers started to spread in the palace halls. If the princess died, the queen's wrath would shake the stars. Far from the royal chambers, in the broken ruins of the city outskirts, a lone man walked among the shadows. His name was Elias Morn. Once, he had been a medic in the human defense forces, running through battlefields with nothing but his kit, his hands, and his stubborn will to keep people alive. But those days were gone. Elias had lost his unit in the last major conflict. He had no family left, no rank, and no home. The war had taken everything from him except his skills. Now, he wandered the ruins, helping whoever crossed his path, for no payment, because there was nothing left to pay with. That day, as he searched an abandoned supply station for bandages, Elias overheard a group of scavengers talking. They were speaking in quick, nervous tones. They say the alien queen's daughter is dying, one said. Good, maybe that'll teach them not to, another began, but was quickly shushed. No, you don't understand. They've tried everything. Nothing works. The poison. They say it's the kind humans used to treat once. Back in the old wars, Elias paused, his hand stilling over a half-crushed box of syringes. His mind worked quickly. A toxin humans had treated before. That meant there might be a chance. A small one, maybe, but a chance. The scavengers noticed his interest and laughed. What? You going to walk into the queen's palace and ask to help? They'd throw you into the dungeons before you made it through the first gate. Elias straightened. His eyes were tired, but there was something in them, a spark of stubbornness that refused to die. If no one else will try, he said simply, then I will. The scavengers laughed harder, shaking their heads. Go ahead, medic man. We'll light a candle for you when they cut your head off. Hours later, Elias stood at the edge of the palace gates. The guards were towering Xyrexians in dark armor, each holding a long ceremonial spear. Their eyes narrowed as he approached. I'm here to see the queen, Elias said. The guards stared in silence for a long moment. Then, one let out a short, humorless laugh. The queen does not see humans, especially not ones who think they can treat the princess. Elias met the guard's gaze without flinching. If I walk away, she will die. I might be able to stop that. Something in his tone, calm, steady, without fear, made the guards pause. One tilted his head slightly, listening to something, through his communicator. Then, with clear reluctance, they ordered Elias to follow. He was led through the palace halls, past carved stone walls and glowing crystal columns. Every Xyrexian he passed stared at him as though he were some strange animal that had wandered in from the street. Finally, they reached the forbidden chamber, the room where the princess lay. The air inside was thick with the scent of unfamiliar medicines. A group of alien healers stood back from the bed, their faces grimmed out at the far end. The queen stood like a statue carved from black marble, her golden eyes fixed on Elias the moment he entered. "This is the human?" she asked, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Yes, your majesty," one of the guards replied. The queen's gaze sharpened. "You understand, human, that if you harm her, even by accident, your life ends here?" "I understand," Elias said. He approached the bed slowly. Princess Athalia lay there, her skin pale with a faint silver hue, her breathing shallow. Even in illness, she was striking, with fine features and a regal presence. Elias opened his kit, speaking softly as he worked. "All right, let's see what we have here." He didn't know if she understood him, but he kept talking, voice calm, steady, human. The queen watched in silence, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. The healers whispered to one another, doubtful. Elias examined the wound site. The faint traces of the toxin spread, and the strange reaction it had. With Xyrexian biology, his mind raced through old training, scraps of battlefield knowledge, and every desperate trick he had learned in the chaos of war. This might sting, he murmured as he prepared a serum from his limited supplies. The princess's eyes fluttered, open for a moment, meeting his dot, and then, for the first time since her illness began, her breathing grew a little stronger. The chamber was silent except for the faint sound of the princess's breathing. It was still shallow, but Elias could hear that it was stronger than when he first entered. The queen's golden eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign that she had noticed the change. The alien healers exchanged uncertain glances. They had been trying for days with no success, and now, in just a few careful moves, the human had made a difference. "Explain what you are doing," the queen demanded. Elias didn't look up from his work. "I'm using a serum that slows the spread of certain poisons. This one is old, used in human wars long before Xyrexians knew our name. It won't cure her, but it will give her body more time." The queen's voice was cold. "Time for what?" "To find the real cure," Elias replied simply. He adjusted the small tube, making sure the fluid entered her system slowly. Princess Athalia's eyelids trembled. She turned her head slightly and focused on the strange figure beside her bed, the one who spoke in a low, steady voice. Not like the sharp commands of the palace healers. She tried to speak, but only a weak sound came out. Elias leaned closer. "Don't strain yourself," he said quietly. "Save your strength." The queen stepped closer, her shadow falling over both of them. "If she worsens, you will not leave this room alive." Elias glanced up briefly, meeting her fierce gaze. "If I fail, I won't want to leave." The queen studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether that was bravery or foolishness. Then she gave a short, sharp nod for him to continue. For the next hour, Elias worked carefully. He used a portable scanner from his medic kit to track the toxin spread. He checked her pulse, her breathing, and her skin temperature. The Xyrexian healers observed closely, some taking notes, others looking doubtful. When Elias finished the first stage, he leaned back slightly and spoke to the queen. "This will slow the poison, but I need to see the original injury site. Where was she struck?" The queen hesitated. Xyrexians rarely allowed outsiders to touch their royalty, especially at their most vulnerable. But after a tense pause, she signaled for one of the healers to remove the thin layer of armor covering. The princess sighed. The wound was unlike anything Elias had seen before. A faint silver burn spread in uneven lines across her skin, pulsing with an unnatural light. He could tell the toxin had bonded with her blood, changing its chemistry. "This is different," he murmured, "but I've seen something close to it before." He cleaned the area gently, applying a compound that reduced surface inflammation. The princess winced, her hand twitching toward him instinctively, without thinking. Elias took her hand lightly, the way he used to do for frightened soldiers. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're doing fine." The alien healers stiffened. The queen's eyes widened just slightly. Humans were not supposed to touch royal blood. But instead of pulling away, Princess Athalia's fingers tightened faintly around his. It was a small thing, but in the tense air of the forbidden chamber, it felt like the start of something larger. That night, Elias was not allowed to leave the palace. The queen ordered that he be given a small guest chamber, guarded by 2 soldiers at all times. The message was clear. This was not a welcome. It was containment. Elias didn't mind. He spent the night reviewing the data he had collected from the princess's scans. He knew the serum would hold back the toxin for maybe 3 or 4 days at most. After that, without a cure, she would fade again. In the early morning, a guard escorted him back to the princess's chamber. She was awake this time, propped up slightly with the help of the healers. Her eyes followed him as he approached. "Medic man," she said in a quiet, uncertain voice, her accent heavy. Elias blinked in surprise, then smiled faintly. "That's me. How are you feeling?" She tilted her head slightly. "Better, small better." The queen, standing nearby, looked from her daughter to Elias. "She has not spoken since the toxin struck," she said slowly. "Not to me, not to anyone. And yet she speaks to you." Elias kept his tone even. "Maybe because I speak to her like a person, not like a patient." The queen's expression was unreadable, but she said nothing. Over the next 2 days, Elias continued his treatments. He explained each step to the princess, even though she might not understand every word. He told her stories from the human warfront, the safe ones, about saving lives, not losing them. The palace staff began to notice changes. The princess's color improved slightly. Her breathing was easier. Sometimes she even smiled faintly at the humans' odd jokes. But not everyone was pleased. In the dark corners of the palace, some whispered that the queen's trust in the human was dangerous. Others said it was shameful to let an outsider handle the royal heir. One evening, as Elias prepared a fresh dose of serum, the queen approached him privately. "You speak to her as if she were your own," she said. Elias looked up from his work. "I speak to her as someone worth saving." "That's the same thing." The queen studied him for a long, silent moment, then asked, "Why? She is not of your kind. You owe her nothing." Elias's answer was simple, "Because no one else is trying." That night, as Elias left the chamber under guard, he overheard the healers speaking quietly. "The cure lies in the ancient city ruins, far beyond the safe zone. Even our soldiers avoid it," one said. "Even if the human knew where to look, he would not survive the journey," the other replied. Elias didn't say a word, but he memorized every detail of what he heard. He knew what he had to do. The serum would not last forever, and if the cure truly existed out there, in the ruined war zone, then he would go, with or without the queen's permission. But first, he had to keep the princess alive long enough for him to return. The days inside the Xyrexian royal palace passed slowly for Elias. Each morning, he was escorted by guards to the princess's chamber. Each night, he was led back to his guest room. The heavy doors locked from the outside. It wasn't freedom, but it was enough. The princess was still alive, and that was what mattered. Elias had developed a careful routine. He would check her breathing, scan her blood, adjust the serum dosage, and then talk to her quietly while the medicine took effect. The princess, though still weak, began to answer him more often. Sometimes her words were short and broken, sometimes in her own language, but always with a spark in her eyes that had not been there before. The queen often stood nearby, silent as a statue, watching. She never interrupted, never helped, but never stopped him either. Elias could feel her measuring every word, every action. One afternoon, Elias noticed something different. The toxin spread had slowed more than he expected. The serum was working better than his calculations predicted. That's strange, he muttered under his breath. Princess Athlia tilted her head slightly. Strange, good. Elias smiled faintly. Yes, strange, good. But he knew it was only a delay. Without the true cure, her recovery would stop, and the toxin would eventually win. The court's whispers grew louder each day. Some believed the human was a miracle worker. Others said he was a dangerous trickster, gaining influence over the queen through her daughter. Late one evening, as Elias left the chamber, he overheard two nobles in the hallway. The queen lets him touch the princess like they are family. One said in a low, angry tone, "It is a disgrace." The other replied, "A human's hands are not worthy. I say we end this before." Their voices faded as they walked away. But Elias understood enough. Not everyone wanted him to succeed. The next morning, Elias returned to find the princess sitting up with help from a servant. It was the first time she had done so since he arrived. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Medic man," she said. Her voice still weak but steady. Elias grinned. "You're looking better." She gestured for him to sit closer. "Tell story." The queen raised one eyebrow but said nothing. Elias took out a small cloth from his kit, a faded piece of fabric with a strange red emblem on it. "This," he said, "was from my old unit. We were medics on the battlefield. Our job was simple: get to the wounded before the fight ended and bring them back alive." The princess listened quietly. "Dangerous," she said. "Yes," Elias replied, "but worth it. Every life you save, you remember forever." For the first time, the queen spoke. "And every life you lose," Elias's smile faded slightly, "you remember those too." Later that day, Elias prepared a new scan of the princess's blood. The data confirmed what he feared. The serum's effect was beginning to weaken. Soon, it would stop working altogether. That night, while the guards escorted him back to his quarters, Elias made his decision. If the cure truly lay in the ancient ruins outside the safe zone, then he would go there himself. The ruins were not just dangerous because of the war. They were filled with collapsed buildings, unstable ground, and hidden pockets of radiation. Old security drones still patrolled the area, attacking anything that moved, and worst of all, the place was crawling with scavenger gangs, desperate people who would kill for a single scrap of metal. Still, Elias had faced worse during the human resistance days. He could do it again. But first, he needed to know exactly where in the ruins the cure might be. The next day, he tried to question the palace healers. They were wary of him, but curious about his methods. He offered to explain some human medical techniques in exchange for their knowledge of the old city's supply caches. Most refused. But one young healer, Varus, hesitated. Varus was not like the others. He was fascinated by human medicine and asked many questions. Eventually, Elias earned his trust. The old city's central hospital. Varus whispered when no one was listening. It was sealed before the war ended. Many say it still holds rare medicines, but it is deep inside the dead zone. Elias nodded. That's all I needed to know. That evening, Elias spoke to the princess privately while the guards stood at the far end of the room. Athlia. He said quietly, "I'm going to leave for a little while." Her brow furrowed. "Leave? Why? To find something that will make you better. Not just for a few days, but for good." She looked down, her fingers gripping the blanket. "Dangerous?" "Yes," Elias admitted. "But if I don't go, the danger will find you instead." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out and lightly touched his hand. "Come back." "I will," Elias promised. That night, Elias began preparing. He hid a small pack under his bed, medical supplies, a portable scanner, a few energy rations, and a short-range communicator. He planned to slip past the guards at dawn, before the palace was fully awake. But he was not as unnoticed as he thought. In the shadows of the palace corridors, a tall figure watched him, the queen herself. She had guessed his intentions. She did not stop him, not yet. Instead, she wondered, was this human's determination loyalty, or something far more dangerous? By the next morning, Elias was ready. The guards at his door were half asleep when he quietly stepped out, moving silently through the side halls. He avoided the main corridors, keeping to the dim service passages until he reached a small maintenance exit that opened toward the outer wall. The city ruins stretched out before him. Broken towers, twisted metal, and streets choked with dust. Somewhere in that wasteland was the cure. He tightened the straps on his pack, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. Behind him, high in the palace tower, the queen stood at a window, watching the lone figure vanish into the shadows of the dead city. The ruins of the old city stretched endlessly before Elias. The wind carried the smell of metal dust and burned stone. The morning light was pale and weak. Struggling to reach through the thick clouds above, Elias moved carefully, keeping low behind broken walls and collapsed buildings. Every step crunched on rubble, and he knew sound could travel far in these empty streets. Somewhere out here, scavenger gangs made their camps, and old defense drones still hunted anything that moved. He stopped in front of what used to be a wide avenue. Now it was blocked by a fallen tower, its steel frame bent like twisted bones. Beyond it, he could see the outline of the central hospital, his destination. That was where the rare medicine might be stored. He studied the path ahead. No direct way, he muttered to himself. He would have to move through side alleys, where cover was better. The deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. Twice, he spotted the remains of drones, their metal bodies rusting under layers of dust. But other drones still worked, their red scanning lights cutting through the gloom. When he heard the faint mechanical hum of one drawing near, Elias pressed himself flat against a wall. A small flying machine floated past, its sensor sweeping the street. He held his breath until it moved on. After nearly 2 hours of moving quietly, Elias reached the edge of the hospital grounds. The hospital's outer walls were cracked, with deep scorch marks where explosives had struck. The main doors were half buried in rubble, but a side entrance stood partially open. Elias slipped inside. The air inside was stale and cold. Long hallways stretched ahead, lined with overturned beds and smashed equipment. Faded emergency lights still glowed faintly in the ceiling. He followed the signs marked with the old medical symbol until he reached the pharmacy storage wing. The door was sealed with an old security lock, but the power systems here were long dead. Elias knelt, pulling a small cutting tool from his pack. It took him several minutes to slice through the metal, but at last the door swung open. Inside, shelves lined the walls, covered in dust. Many containers had broken over the years, but some still looked intact. He began scanning each one with his portable medical device. Most were useless, either expired or for common illnesses. Then, near the back of the room, the scanner gave a sharp beep. Antitoxin for 7B, a rare serum designed for deep-bonding biological toxins, the exact thing he needed. Elias smiled in relief and quickly packed as many vials as he could carry without damaging them. The relief didn't last. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside. Low voices spoke in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was rough and sharp. Scavengers. Elias froze, listening. There were at least 3 of them. He quickly slid behind an overturned metal cabinet, holding his breath. The door creaked open, and 2 shadowy figures entered the storage room. They carried makeshift weapons. One had a metal pipe, the other a short blade made from scrap. The scavengers searched the shelves, muttering angrily when they found nothing valuable. One moved closer to where Elias hid. Elias waited until the man turned slightly, then stepped out and struck with the edge of his pack. The scavenger stumbled back, hitting the shelves with a crash. The other turned, raising his weapon, but Elias was already moving, shoving the man hard into the wall. The noise was enough to draw the 3rd scavenger from the hallway. Seeing the fight, he lunged forward with his blade. Elias barely managed to twist aside. Feeling the sharp edge cut through the strap of his pack, he kicked the scavenger's leg, sending him down, then grabbed his pack and bolted for the exit. By the time he reached the outer wall, the scavengers were shouting behind him. One even fired a crude energy pistol, the beam striking the rubble near his feet. Elias didn't stop running until he was several streets away. His chest burned with effort. But he kept going. Every second mattered, not just for his safety, but for the princess's life. Hours later, the palace walls finally came into view. The tall towers shimmered faintly under the cloudy sky, a sharp contrast to the ruins behind him. Elias approached the gates, but the guards immediately crossed their spears in front of him. "You left without permission," one said coldly. "I have the cure," Elias replied, breathing heavily. "Take me to the queen." The guards hesitated, clearly unsure, but finally opened the way. In the forbidden chamber, the queen stood beside her daughter's bed. The princess's breathing had grown weaker again. When Elias entered, carrying the pack, the queen's gaze locked on him. "You disobeyed my orders," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "And I brought back the one thing that can save her," Elias answered. He stepped forward, opening the pack to reveal the vials. The alien healers leaned closer, scanning the labels. Several gasped quietly. "This could work," one said. The queen's eyes narrowed. "Do it." Elias worked quickly, preparing the antitoxin and injecting it into the princess's system. The healers monitored her vital signs, their voices low but urgent. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her breathing deepened. The strange silver tint in her skin began to fade. The queen's hand, resting on the edge of the bed, tightened slightly, the only sign of her emotions. But the moment of relief was short-lived. A sudden movement caught Elias's eye. One of the guards near the door had drawn his blade and was rushing toward the bed. Without thinking, Elias moved. He stepped between the assassin and the princess, catching the blade strike on his arm. Pain shot through him, but he didn't stop. Using his other hand, he grabbed the guard's wrist and shoved him backward. The queen reacted instantly, striking the attacker with a force that sent him crashing into the wall. More guards rushed in, dragging the assassin away. Blood dripped from Elias's arm, but he ignored it. "The cure's working," he said through clenched teeth. "Don't stop now." The healers completed the procedure while Elias sat nearby, holding a cloth over his wound. Slowly, Princess Athalia's eyes opened. She looked at him, recognition and relief in her gaze. "Medic man," she whispered. Elias smiled faintly. "Told you I'd come back." The queen looked at him for a long moment, the human who had nothing, now bleeding from protecting her heir. There was no anger in her eyes now, only something colder, deeper, and perhaps a touch of respect. The chamber was quiet after the attack. The assassin had been dragged away. The guards stood tense at the doors, and the healers focused on the princess. Elias sat on a small stool beside the bed, holding a cloth against the deep cut on his arm. His breathing was steady, but his eyes never left the princess. The antitoxin had taken full effect. The strange silver tint in her skin had faded completely, and her pulse was strong again. The shallow breathing had been replaced by slow, even breaths. The queen stood close, her golden eyes fixed on her daughter. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she turned to Elias. "You bled for her," she said quietly. Elias gave a tired smile. "I'd do it again." The queen studied him. Why? His answer was simple. Because no one else would. Over the next 2 days, the palace changed. News spread quickly. The princess was recovering, and it was because of the human medic who had risked his life to save her. Some courtiers were grateful, bowing their heads slightly when they passed Elias. In the halls, others avoided him, their pride unwilling to accept what he had done. Elias didn't care about either group. He stayed by the princess's side, checking her condition, making sure the recovery stayed on track. By the 3rd day, Princess Athalia could sit up on her own. Her voice was stronger, and she spoke more often. "You kept promise," she said to Elias as he adjusted her pillows. "I told you I would," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You are stubborn," Elias chuckled. "I've been told that before." The queen visited often now, sometimes in silence, sometimes asking questions about human medicine. She never admitted it, but her eyes always softened slightly when she saw her daughter speaking with Elias one evening. As the sun set behind the tall crystal towers, The queen entered the chamber with several high-ranking members of her court. Elias Morn, she said, her voice formal. Stand. Elias rose from the stool, keeping his injured arm close to his side. You have done what no Xyrexian healer could. You saved the heir to the throne, not once, but twice. You did so without fear and without asking for reward. She paused, then added, for this, you will be given the title Friend of the Crown. No human has ever held this honor. A murmur swept through the court. Some looked shocked. Others displeased. Elias simply nodded. Thank you, Your Majesty. Later that night, the queen spoke to him in private. There's wealth, land, and command waiting for you if you want it, she said. Name your reward, and it will be yours. Elias shook his head. I don't want wealth. I don't want power. I just want a place where I can help people, anyone, human or Xyrexian, without needing permission. The queen tilted her head slightly. A medical outpost, yes, somewhere near the border, where it's needed most. For a long moment, she was silent. Then she said, It will be done. The day came when Elias was ready to leave the palace. The princess was fully recovered now, walking beside her mother as they escorted him to the gates. Athaliah stopped just before he stepped outside. You will visit? She asked. Elias smiled. I will. And you'll send word if you ever need me. She nodded. Always. The queen stepped forward. Elias Morn, she said, you came to my gates with nothing. You leave with my respect and my gratitude. Elias bowed slightly. That's more than enough. Beyond the palace walls, the city was still scarred from the years of war. But Elias walked with a steady step, his pack on his back, his future clear in his mind. He had nothing when he arrived. Now, he carried something greater than gold or rank, trust. And somewhere in the shining towers behind him, the most powerful ruler in this part of the galaxy knew his name and would remember it. Weeks later, in a quiet corner of the borderlands, a small medical outpost opened. Its sign bore no royal crest, no grand symbols, only a simple mark in red, the same one from Elias's old medic cloth. People came from both sides, humans and Xyrexians, bringing their injured, their sick, and their weary. Elias treated them all the same way, with steady hands, calm words, and no questions about where they came from. Sometimes, at sunset, he would stand outside and look toward the distant horizon, where the palace towers caught the last light of day, and he would think of a young princess who had once called him Medic Man, and a queen who had once sworn no human would ever touch her daughter, until the human with nothing gave her everything.